Jake Chen floated through the corridor of harmony, Point Research Station with his duffel bag bumping against his leg, and wondered for the 100th time if accepting this assignment had been smart or stupid, but either way he was here now, orbiting a neutral moon between human and Valkyrie, space, about to meet his new roommate for the next 6 months. Cultural liaison position had sounded perfect on paper, living aboard an interspecies research station helping humans and Valkyrie scientists work together smoothly and getting paid decent money to be the friendly human face of diplomacy, but nobody had mentioned until 3 days ago that housing was tight and he would be sharing quarters with a Valkyrie xenobiologist named Shverajak. Had never met a Valkyrie in person before, and he tried not to stare. When the door to their shared apartment slid open, and she stood there, in the doorway, all 7 feet of her, with iridescent blue skin that seemed to shift colors in the light, and 4 graceful arms that moved with fluid precision as she gestured him inside. "Welcome, Jake Chen," she said in perfect English, though her voice had a musical quality that no human throat could produce. "I am Shvera, and I hope our cohabitation will be mutually beneficial and professionally productive." Jake grinned and extended his hand for a shake, then remembered. Akari did not shake hands and awkwardly converted the gesture into a small wave instead. He was already messing up, but Shvera did not seem offended, just curious, as one of her lower hands mimicked his wave with what might have been amusement. The apartment was bigger than Jake expected, with 2 private sleeping quarters, a shared common area, and a small kitchen, though Valkyrie and human food requirements were different enough that they would mostly be eating separately, but the space felt comfortable, and Shvera had already decorated her half with bioluminescent plants from her homeworld that cast soft purple light across the walls. The first 3 months passed smoothly enough, and Jake found himself genuinely liking his alien roommate despite their differences. Shvera was brilliant and dedicated to her work studying human bacterial interactions with Valkyrie immune systems, and she had a dry sense of humor that caught Jake off guard when she made jokes about human coffee addiction or the strange human need to wear shoes indoors. They fell into an easy routine where Jake worked his liaison shifts, helping smooth over cultural misunderstandings between species, while Shvera spent long hours in her lab, and in the evenings they would sometimes share stories about their worlds, and Jake learned that Valkyrie had 3 moons around their home world, and children who could swim before they could walk, while Shvera learned about Earth seasons and human family structures that seemed chaotic and loud compared to Valkyrie pod systems. But day 92, everything changed when the station alarms started blaring and the emergency announcement echoed through every corridor. "Attention, all personnel. Solar radiation storm approaching. All crew must report to quarters. Immediately lockdown protocols in effect for minimum 72 hours. Jake was in the middle of a meeting when the alarm sounded, and he sprinted back to his quarters, finding Shvera already there, pacing the common area with all 4 arms moving in agitated patterns that Jake had never seen before. Her skin was flickering between blue and pale green, and she was checking the environmental controls obsessively. "You okay?" Jake asked, as the door sealed behind him with a heavy magnetic clunk that meant they were locked in until the radiation passage Vera turned to face. Him and Jake noticed for the first time that her skin was emitting a faint glow from within, like someone had put a lamp under her skin. "I am experiencing some difficulties," she said, and her voice was higher pitched than usual. "This lockdown has created atmospheric pressure, changes in our quarters that are triggering a biological response." Jake moved closer slowly, like approaching a spooked animal. "What kind of biological response do you need?" "Medical help?" No medical intervention required," Shvera said quickly, but she would not meet his eyes, and her skin was now pulsing with light in waves that traveled from her head down to her feet. "This is a natural cycle for my species, but the timing is very unfortunate, and I apologize for the inconvenience." Jake sat down on the couch and kept his voice calm and casual. "Inconvenience is fine, Shvera, but I need to know what is happening so I can help, or at least not make things worse." Shvera finally stopped pacing and stood very still with all 4 arms wrapped around her torso in what looked like a self-hug. "My species experiences an intense biological cycle," she said, slowly triggered by specific atmospheric conditions that occur naturally on our homeworld. but apparently also occur accidentally. In sealed environments during radiation, lockdowns paused, and the glow under her skin intensified until Jake could see patterns of light moving like rivers across her body. During this cycle, she continued, Velkar become hyper-focused on problem, solving creative projects and social bonding with heightened emotions and energy levels. It is not dangerous, but it is intense and personal, and I did not expect to experience it here, away from my family, Jake. Processed this information and decided to treat it like any other cross-cultural situation, with respect and practical help, okay? So you are going through something intense, and we are locked in here together for 3 days. What do you need from me? What can Avizer Shvera? Looked at him with large, dark eyes that reflected the bioluminescent glow from her skin. You are not disturbed by this situation, Jake. Shrugged, we are going to be stuck inside together anyway because of the storm, so we might as well make the best of it. Think of it like being snowed in, except with radiation instead of snow. Just tell me what helps and what does not help, and we will figure it out. The relief on Shivara's face was visible, and some of the tension left her shoulders, though the glowing continued. I did not expect such calm acceptance from a human, she said quietly. I expected judgment, or fear, or demands that I suppress the cycle, Jake. Smiled, humans are pretty adaptable. Shvera, that is kind of our thing, rolling with unexpected situations and helping each other out so seriously. What do you need, Shvera? Opened her mouth to answer, but then her whole body went rigid, and the glow under her skin suddenly intensified to the point where Jake had to squint against the brightness. Patterns of light began racing across her skin in complex geometric designs, and she made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a song. Jake stood up, alarmed. Shvera, what is happening? But Shvera was no longer looking at him. Her eyes had gone distant and unfocused, and she began speaking rapidly in her native language, which sounded like water running over stones mixed with wind chimes, and Jake could not understand a word of it, but the tone shifted between what sounded like scientific calculations and deeply emotional confessions. Jake realized with growing concern that this cycle was going to be far more complicated than either of them had anticipated, and they still had 72 hours minimum locked in this apartment together, while Shvera went through something that was clearly overwhelming her rational mind. He took a deep breath and reminded himself that humans had faced stranger situations before, and that panic would not help anyone right now. Shvera needed stability and support, not fear, so Jake would figure out how to provide that, even if he had no idea what he was doing, though. Bioluminescent patterns on Shvera's skin began to pulse in rhythm with words she was speaking, and the entire apartment filled with shifting colored light that was beautiful and disorienting at the same time, and Jake settled in for what was clearly going to be a very long 3 days hash. When my alien roommate's mating cycle began, I was trapped inside with her Hosh Part 2. Understanding the storm, Jake woke up on the couch where he had eventually fallen asleep around 3 in the morning after Shvera had finally quieted down and retreated to her sleeping quarters. But when he opened his eyes and looked around the apartment, he thought for a moment that he was still dreaming, because nothing was where it was supposed to. Beatty furniture had been completely rearranged into elaborate geometric patterns, with the chairs forming a circle around the table, which now stood on its side, and their various belongings, books, datapads, coffee mugs, and Shvera's scientific equipment, were laid out in precise lines and curves that looked like some kind of mathematical equation. Shvera herself was sitting cross-legged in the UCS center of the furniture circle, with all 4 arms moving constantly as she continued to rearrange smaller objects into new patterns, and her skin was glowing bright cyan with pulses of golden light racing across her shoulders and down her arms. Jake sat up slowly so he would not startle her and cleared his throat. Shvera, are you okay? She jumped at the sound of his voice, and all 4 arms froze mid-motion. Then she looked around at what she had done to their apartment, and her skin flushed. Deep purple color that Jake had learned meant embarrassment or shame. I am so sorry, she said, and her voice was shaking. I could not stop myself. The nesting impulse is overwhelming, and I had to create patterns, had to organize everything into proper Configurations. Jake stood up and stretched his back, which was sore from the couch, and walked over to examine the furniture. Patterns more closely. These are really impressive, actually. What are they? Menshvira blinked at him, clearly not expecting that response. They are harmonic ratios, she said slowly. The mathematical relationships that govern sound and light and gravitational waves during the cycle. My species becomes hyper-focused on finding patterns and creating order from chaos. It is a survival instinct from when we lived in tidal pools and had to predict wave patterns to avoid being washed away. That is actually pretty cool, Jake said, and he meant it. But hey, maybe next time warn me before you turn our couch into modern art, so I can sleep in my actual bed. Fur's skin flushed purple again, and she started frantically disassembling the furniture patterns. I will return everything immediately. I apologize for disrupting your rest. This is exactly why Valkyrie should experience cycles within their family pods, not isolated in alien environments. Jake held up a hand to stop her. It is fine, Shavira. Seriously, I am just trying to understand what you need, so I can help you through this. Talk to me. What would your family pod do if they were her? Shavira stopped moving in for a moment. She looked so lost and alone that Jake felt his chest tighten with sympathy. Then she spoke quietly. My family would help me complete the pattern projects. Whatever my mind fixates on, they would work alongside me and help bring the visions into reality. And when the emotions became too strong, they would share their own feelings and memories, so I would not feel alone in the intensity. Looked down at her forehands, which were trembling slightly. I have been alone in human space for 2 years, she continued, and this is my first cycle without my pod. The isolation makes it more intense, more unpredictable, because my mind has no familiar anchors to ground itself. Jake absorbed this information and made a decision right then. Okay, so I cannot replace your family pod, but I can try to help with what you need starting now. What project is your mind focused on right now? This menu. Teshvera looked up at him with surprise. You would do this? You would participate in cycle activities with me? Jake shrugged. I am already locked in here with you anyway, and honestly, watching you work is kind of fascinating, so yeah, I will help. What are we building for? The first time since the cycle began, Shvera's skin shifted to a warm amber color that Jake thought might be happiness or gratitude. I am trying to map the resonance frequencies of the station hull, she said with growing excitement. If we can determine the harmonic nodes, we might be able to predict structural stress points before they become dangerous. Jake grinned. Now that sounds useful. Show me what you need. They spent the next several hours working together with Shvera, explaining her theories while Jake helped measure and record data, and Jake found that once he stopped worrying about the strangeness of the situation and just focused on the work, it was actually enjoyable. Watching how Shvara's mind operated during the cycle was like watching a master pianist play. She moved between ideas with fluid grace, making connections that seemed impossible, but somehow worked during a break for food. Jake noticed that Shvera's skin colors had stabilized into a steady teal glow instead of the frantic pulsing from before. Hey, you seem calmer? Observed. Shvera looked down at herself as if just noticing. Yes, having a project partner helps ground the cycle energy instead of spiraling inward with no outlet. She met his eyes, and her expression was serious. Jake Chen, you should know that Valkyrie judge species by how they respond to vulnerability and discomfort. Many species we have encountered either exploit weakness or withdraw from it with disgust. And Jake asked, though he thought he knew where this was going. Shvera's skin shifted through several colors before settling on amber again. I volunteered for this assignment, partly to prove to my family and my government that humans could be trusted as partners, that you were not just clever primitives who would abandon allies when things became difficult. Your response to my cycle is confirming everything I hoped about your species. Jake felt the weight of that statement and realized that this weird situation was about more than just two roommates stuck together. It was a test of humanity, self, and so far humanity was passing no pressure. He said with a weak smile before Shavira could respond. The station AI voice echoed through their quarters. Attention, all personnel. Radiation storm has intensified lockdown. Extended additional 48 hours. Environmental control malfunction. Detected in Sector 7, expect temperature and pressure fluctuations. Shure's skin immediately flashed bright red, which Jake now recognized as alarm. The pressure fluctuations will intensify the cycle, she said rapidly, if the atmospheric conditions become unstable, my biological responses will become more extreme and unpredictable. Jake checked the environmental readout on the wall panel and saw that their sector was Sector 7. We need to manually stabilize the controls, he said. There is an access panel in the maintenance tunnel. I can go fix it. Shvira moved faster than Jake had ever seen her move and grabbed his arm with startling strength, all four hands gripping him as her skin flared crimson. No, she said, and her voice was sharp with fear. If you go into those tunnels during a radiation storm, you could be exposed if something happens to you while I am in this state. The guilt and isolation could cause a complete psychological break. Jake stared at her. What do you mean, Brek Velkari have died from such breaks, Shvera said quietly. When isolated during cycles and abandoned by their support system, the mind turns inward and consumes itself. I need you alive, Jake. I need you here, present and responsive, even if the cycle intensifies beyond what either of us can predict. Jake felt a chill run down his spine, and he gently pulled his arm free from her grip. Okay, he said, I will stay, but we need to figure out another way to stabilize the environmental controls before this gets worse. Shvera nodded, but her skin remained red with alarm, and Jake could see new patterns beginning to form under her skin. More complex and faster moving than before. The cycle was intensifying, and they still had 4 more days. Locked together in conditions that were about to become much more difficult, Jake took a deep breath and reminded himself again that humans were adaptable, that they had survived worse situations through cooperation and determination, and that panicking would help no one right now. What he needed was a plan, and what Shvera needed was stability. All right, he said with more confidence than he felt. Let us inventory what we have in here and figure out if there is a way to access the environmental controls without leaving the apartment, because I have a feeling things are about to get a lot more interesting. Cher made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob, and her skin flickered between red and purple. Interesting is one word for it, she said. Then she looked at Jake with an expression he could not quite read. Thank you for staying. Thank you for not running. Jake smiled. Humans do not run from our friends. Shvera, we show up especially when things get hard. That is what makes us human. Skin shifted to deep amber, and she touched his shoulder gently with one hand. Then let us show the universe what humans and Velkari can accomplish together, even in impossible circumstances. When my alien roommate's mating cycle began, I was trapped inside with her. Part 3, the breaking point. Environmental controls failed completely 6 hours after the lockdown extension announcement, and Jake felt the change immediately as the temperature in their quarters climbed from comfortable to sweltering, and the atmospheric pressure began fluctuating wildly, making his ears pop and his head pound with each shift. Shvera reacted even more dramatically as her skin began glowing so brightly that Jake had to look away, and she dropped to her knees in the center of the common area with all 4 arms wrapped around herself as she made sounds that were somewhere between singing and crying. Jake rushed to her side and knelt down next to her, careful not to touch her without permission. Shvera, talk to me. What is happening? What do you need? Shvi looked up at him, and her eyes had changed, somehow becoming more reflective and distant, as if she was seeing something beyond the physical space around them. The deepening, she whispered it, is the deepening when consciousness becomes fluid and barriers dissolve. I cannot control it anymore, Jake. I cannot hold back the connection. The connection? Jake asked, though part of him already knew the answer would be something he was not prepared for. Shvera reached out with one trembling hand and touched his arm, and the moment her skin made contact with his, Jake felt something like electricity surge through his nervous system. Except it was not electricity, it was memory and emotion flooding directly into his mind. He saw through Shvera's eyes as a young Velkari child swimming through underwater colonies with bioluminescent fish darting around her, and felt her joy at discovering her first scientific principle when she noticed how light refracted differently through water at different temperatures. Memory shifted, and Jake experienced her decision to study humans Despite her family's fears about the strange, aggressive species that had recently joined galactic society, and he felt her determination to prove that connection was possible between species, if only they could learn to understand each other another. Shift and Jake felt Shvara's loneliness during her 2 years in human space, the ache of being separated from her family pawed the doubt that crept in during long nights, wondering if she had made a mistake. If humans would ever truly accept her, or if she would always be the alien outsider. Jake gasped and pulled back from the contact, his heart racing and his mind reeling from the intensity of experiencing someone else's life so directly, but Shvara was still glowing, still caught in whatever biological process was overwhelming her, and he realized that she could not stop the sharing even if she wanted to, instead of pulling away further. Jake made a decision that surprised himself and reached out to take Shvara's hand again, deliberately opening himself to the connection. If this was what the cycle required, then he would meet her halfway, because that was what humans did when someone needed help. They showed up fully. The memories flooded back, but this time Jake focused on sending his own memories in return, sharing his childhood in San Francisco, with the fog rolling over the hills, and his decision to become a cultural liaison after meeting an alien refugee who had nowhere to go and no one to help them navigate human society. He shared his nervousness about meeting Shvara for the first time and his growing respect for her dedication and intelligence over the past 3 months, and he shared his determination now to help her through this crisis, no matter how strange or uncomfortable it became, because she had become his friend. And humans protected their friend. Shvara's glowing intensified, but the frantic quality faded and was replaced by something more focused and directed. She squeezed his hand with surprising gentleness, and Jake felt gratitude and wonder flowing through their connection, along with a new understanding through the shared memories. Jake began to grasp something fundamental about Valkyrie culture that he had not understood before this cycle. This forced vulnerability was not just biological, it was social. It served a crucial function, forcing individuals to be completely honest and communities to demonstrate care without reservation. Species that could not handle this level of intimacy could never truly partner with Valkyrie, because they would always hold something back, always maintain emotional distance, and Shvara had been testing humanity, testing Jake to see if humans were capable of the depth of relationship that Valkyrie needed to trust another species completely. The realization hit Jake hard, because he understood now that this was not just about 2 roommates weathering a crisis. This was about the entire future of human Valkyrie relations, and whether their 2 species could become genuine allies or would remain polite strangers. Understand, Jake said out loud, though he was not sure if Shvara could hear him through whatever state she was in. I understand what you needed to know, and the answer is yes. Humans can do this. We can care this deeply. We can stay present even when things get overwhelming. Shvara's eyes focused on him again, and for a moment the connection between them sharpened until Jake felt like he could see directly into her mind and she into his. There was nowhere to hide, no way to pretend or perform. Just raw, honest presence between 2 very different beings who were choosing to trust each other. Then Shvara spoke, but her voice sounded in Jake's mind rather than his ears. The environmental controls have manual override in our quarters to person operation. We must stabilize together. Jake blinked, trying to process the telepathic communication, while also figuring out what she meant. Then he remembered seeing an emergency panel near the kitchen area. It required 2 people to operate simultaneously. For safety reasons, he stood up carefully, still holding Shvara's hand to maintain the connection, and helped her to her feet. Come on, he said, we can do this together. Moving while maintaining the telepathic connection was disorienting, because Jake kept experiencing flashes of Shvara's perspective overlaid on his own, but he focused on the task ahead and trusted that Shvara would match his movements. They reached the emergency panel, and Jake examined it quickly, seeing that it required 2 people to turn separate controls simultaneously while also entering an access code. He looked at Shvara, whose movements were still fluid and unpredictable as the cycle continued to overwhelm her. Conscious control. This is going to be like dancing, Jake said out loud. Follow my lead, but also guide me. We need to move together. Shvara nodded, and through their connection, Jake felt her trying to synchronize her breathing with his, trying to ground herself in his steadier rhythm. It was strange and intimate in a way that had nothing to do with physical attraction and everything to do with two minds learning to work as one. Jake counted down 3 to 1, and they moved together with Jake, turning his control while Shwira mirrored his movement on her side, and Jake called out the access code numbers while Shwira entered them with 2 of her hands while her other 2 hands maintained contact with Jake to keep the connection stable. The panel beeped and hummed, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then Jake felt cool air beginning to flow through the vents and saw the pressure readout starting to stabilize. Relief flooded through him, and through the connection he felt Vera's matching relief mixed with exhaustion. "We did it," Jake said, and he could not keep the triumph out of his voice. "We actually did." Ichfra's glowing began to dim slightly, and her movements became less fluid, more controlled as the stabilizing environmental conditions allowed her biology to begin calming, but Jake could see the toll the experience had taken on her as her skin color faded to pale blue and she swayed on her feet. He caught her before she fell and carefully guided her to the couch, where she collapsed with all 4 arms hanging limply at her sides. Her eyes were half closed, and she was breathing heavily as if she had just run a marathon. Jake grabbed water and a cooling cloth and sat next to her, monitoring her vital signs on his data pad and trying to remember. He had learned about Velkari biology. During his cultural training, the cycle would not end immediately, but the worst of the crisis had passed. And now she just needed rest, and Stabila Chefra slept for 16 hours straight while Jake kept watch, making sure her vital signs stayed stable and adjusting the environmental controls to keep the conditions optimal for her recovery. He dozed off, occasionally in the chair next to the couch, but always jerked awake at any sound, afraid that something might be wrong. When Shwira finally opened her eyes fully, the first thing Jake saw on her face was horror. Her skin flushed deep purple, and she tried to sit up too, quickly, then fell back against the cushions as her body protested. "I am so sorry," she said, and her voice was hoarse. "I exposed everything to you, invaded your mind, shared things that should remain private. I have destroyed our friendship and disgraced my entire species." Jake reached out and gently touched her shoulder, stopping the spiral of self-recrimination. "Hey," he said firmly, "none of that. You have nothing to apologize for." "Nothing, but," Shwira started to protest. Jake cut her off. "I saw your memories, yes, and you saw mine. And you know what I learned? That you are brave and dedicated and kind, and that you put yourself in a vulnerable position to test whether humans could be trusted with that vulnerability. Well, here's your answer. We can be trusted. I am still here. I am not running away or filing complaints. I am sitting here making sure you are okay, because that is what friends." Vera's skin color shifted from purple to uncertain amber. "Do you truly mean that you are not disturbed or disgusted by what occurred?" Jake smiled. "I mean every word. Now rest, and when you are feeling better, we can talk about what comes next. But for now, just know that you proved your point. Humans can handle the deep stuff. We can show up when it matters." Vera closed her eyes again, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. But her skin shifted to warm amber, and through the fading connection, Jake felt her relief and gratitude washing over him like a wave. And he knew that whatever happened next, they had crossed a threshold together that would change everything. When my alien roommate's mating cycle began, I was trapped inside with her. Part 4, The Aftermath. Lockdown ended exactly 72 hours after the extension was announced, and Jake heard the magnetic seals on their door release with a soft click that meant they were finally free to leave their quarters. But neither he nor Shwira moved from where they sat on opposite ends of the couch with cups of tea cooling between them as they tried to process everything that had happened. Shwira had recovered physically from the cycle, and her skin had returned to its normal blue color without the intense bioluminescence, but Jake could see the emotional exhaustion in her posture and the way she kept avoiding direct eye contact as if afraid of what she might see in his expression. "We should talk about what happened," Jake said, gently breaking the silence that had stretched between them. For the past, Shwira's skin flickered purple with embarrassment. "I know, and I apologize. I have already." Submitted my incident report to Station Medical and to my government contacts. They will need to know that the cycle was triggered unexpectedly, and that a human was exposed to the deepening without proper preparation. Jake set down his tea and turned to face her fully. Shuvera, look at me, please. She reluctantly met his eyes, and Jake saw fear, their fear of rejection or judgment or damage to their friendship, and he understood that despite everything they had shared, she still expected him to pull away now that the crisis had passed. I want you to hear this clearly, Jake said. There is nothing to apologize for. What you went through was biological and natural. You gave me every warning you could under the circumstances, and honestly, witnessing your vulnerability has only made me respect you more. Not Lashvera's eyes widened. You truly believe that Jake nodded in human culture going through a crisis together often creates the strongest bonds we value, authenticity and courage, and you showed both of those things. You trusted me with something incredibly personal and intimate, and that trust means something to me. Shavira was quiet for a long moment, then she spoke carefully. I need to explain something about why I am here on this station, and why your reaction matters so much more than you realize. Jake leaned forward, listening intently. Was specifically chosen for this assignment, Shavira continued, because I scored highest on human compatibility assessments out of all the candidates, but there were deep concerns in Valkyrie leadership about whether humans were ready for deeper alliance. Whether your species would exploit vulnerability or respond to emotional need with manipulation or cruelty. She took a shaky breath. My mission was partly scientific. Yes, studying bacterial interactions, but it was also deeply diplomatic. I was meant to observe humans in close quarters over extended time and report back on whether your species could be trusted as true partners, not just convenient allies. Jake felt the weight of that revelation settling over him. So I was being tested this whole time, Shavaris. Skin flushed purple again. Not tested exactly, observed. The cycle was not planned. But when it happened, it became the ultimate test, because there is no more vulnerable state for a Valkyrie than the deepening when all barriers are gone and the soul is exposed completely. Species that have responded poorly to this in the past have proven themselves unworthy of Valkyrie trust. And how did I do? Jake asked, though he thought he knew the answer from the way Shavira was looking at him. You exceeded every expectation, Shavira said quietly, and her skin shifted to warm amber. You stayed present. When you could have demanded to be relocated, you worked with me instead of trying to control or suppress the cycle. You shared your own memories and emotions with equal vulnerability, and when I was at my most helpless, you protected me without taking advantage. She met his eyes directly. You proved that humans understand what we need in partners, not just competence or strength, but genuine care and willingness to be present through discomfort, and that report will influence my government's decision about whether to pursue deeper cooperation with Humana. Jake exhaled slowly, feeling the responsibility of that statement. No pressure. Then Shvera actually smiled slightly, the first genuine smile Jake had seen from her since the cycle ended, which is why I am terrified that I may have damaged what we built by exposing too much, by making you uncomfortable, by forcing intimacy that you did not choose. Jake reached across the couch and took one of her hands gently. Shvira, you did not force anything. I chose to stay. I chose to connect with you. I chose to help, because that is what humans do. When we care about someone, we show up fully, even when things get strange or overwhelming. Shavir's other three hands came up to cover her face, and her shoulders shook, and Jake realized she was crying, not with sadness, but with relief, as the tension and fear she had been holding finally released. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while as Shvira cried and Jake kept hold of her hand, providing steady, grounding presence until finally she wiped her eyes and looked at him with clear gratitude. Tell me about your world, Jake said, changing the subject. To give her time to recover, tell me about your family pod and what it was like growing up in underwater Colonia Shveris. His face brightened and she began describing the water world where she was born, with its 3 moons that created complex tidal patterns and bioluminescent forests that grew in the shallow seas. And Jake listened and asked questions, and slowly they found their way back to the easy friendship they had built over the past 3 months, but now with a deeper foundation of trust and understanding. Over the next week, as life on the station returned to normal. Jake and Shivera fell into a new rhythm where they worked together on projects and shared meals and talked about everything from science to philosophy to their hopes for the future, and Jake noticed that other Valkyrie crew members who had previously kept polite distance now approached him with cautious respect. One evening, a Valkyrie engineer named Thoron stopped Jake in the corridor and spoke quietly. "Heard about what happened during the lockdown that you stayed with?" Shivera threw her cycle and did not abandon her. Jake shrugged, not sure what to say. It was the right thing to do. She needed help. Thrawn studied him with dark, reflective eyes. Many species would not see it that way. Many would see vulnerability as weakness to exploit or discomfort to escape. You humans are strange. But perhaps strange in a good way. After Thorin left, Jake found himself thinking about what it meant that his simple choice to be a good friend and roommate was being viewed as something remarkable or unusual, and he realized that humanity still had a lot to prove to the galaxy, that kindness and reliability were not just human weaknesses, but strengths that made them valuable partners. 2 weeks after the lockdown ended, Jake was called to a meeting with Commander Williams, the human officer in charge of the station's operations, and when he arrived, he found Shivera already there, looking nervous and excited. At the same time, "Sit down, Chen," Commander Williams said, gesturing to a chair. "We have received a very interesting proposal from Valkar leadership, and it concerns you specifically." Jake sat down, feeling his heart rate increase. "What kind of proposal, Commander?" Williams pulled up a holographic document. "The Valkari government has proposed a cultural exchange program where humans and Valkari live in mixed family pods to build deep bonds and mutual understanding based on Shivera's report about your response. During her cycle, they believe humans may be capable of the kind of relationship depth that Valkar require for true alliance." Jake glanced at Shivera, who was watching him with hopeful, amber-colored skin. "Okay, that sounds interesting, but what does it have to do with me specifically?" "They want you to be the first human participant," Commander Williams said, "to join a Valkari family pod on their homeworld for a full cycle year, which is about 14 Earth months. Shivera has volunteered to sponsor you into her own family pod, taking personal responsibility for your integration and success." Jake felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. "Wait, what? This is a pivotal moment for human Valkari relations," Commander Williams continued. "If you succeed, the program will expand, creating a generation of humans and Valkari who understand each other at a profound level. If you fail, or if the experiment reveals fundamental incompatibilities, it could set back the alliance for decades." Jake looked at Shivera, who spoke quietly. "I know this is a huge request, and I will understand if you decline, but after what we experienced together, I believe you are capable of this, and my family pod is eager to meet the human who proved that your species can be trusted with our deepest vulnerabilities." Commander Williams leaned forward. "You do not have to decide immediately, Chen, but I need an answer within 48 hours, and I need you to understand that this is bigger than just you. This is about whether humanity can form deep, lasting bonds with other species, or whether we will always remain surface-level allies." Jake nodded slowly, his mind racing with possibilities and fears. "I understand. Can I have time to think about this?" "Of course, Commander." Williams said. Dismissed Jake and Shivera left the office together and walked in silence back toward their quarters until finally Jake spoke. "What would I be doing in your family pod? Exactly what would daily life look like?" Shivera smiled. "You would live with us, participate in our routines and projects, learn our language and customs, and during cycle times, you would provide the support and presence that pod members provide for each other. You would become family, not by biology, but by choice and commitment." "That sounds terrifying and amazing," Jake admits. Vera touched his arm gently. "It is both, and I will not pretend it would be easy. There will be cultural misunderstandings and difficult moments and times when you feel completely lost, but I believe you can do this, Jake. I believe humans can do this." Jake thought about everything he had learned during the lockdown about vulnerability and trust and showing up for people, even when things got overwhelming, and he thought about the opportunity to build something historic between two species who were still learning to understand each other. "Need to think about it," Jake said, "but I am not saying." Nashvera's skin glowed warm amber, and she smiled. "That is all I can ask that." Night Jake lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about his life back on Earth, the career opportunity waiting for him, the family expecting him home, the comfortable, familiar world he knew versus the unknown adventure waiting on an alien world with an alien family learning to bridge a gap between species and, somewhere in the dark hours before dawn, Jake realized that his answer had been obvious from the beginning because humans did not become great by playing it safe. They became great by taking risks, by stepping into the unknown, by choosing connection over comfort when morning came. Jake would give his answer, and whatever happened next would change not just his life, but potentially the course of human history, and that thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. When my alien roommate's mating cycle began, I was trapped inside with her #. Part 5. The New Beginning. Jake walked into Commander Williams' office exactly 48 hours after being given the proposal and found both the commander and HFY waiting for him with expressions that tried to hide their obvious hope and anxiety, and Jake realized that his decision carried more weight than he had fully understood. "I accept." Jake said without preamble, "I will join HFY's family pod and participate in the cultural exchange program." Commander Williams leaned back in her chair with visible relief, and HFY's skin flared bright amber as all 4 of her arms came up in a gesture of joy that Jake had learned meant profound happiness, but the commander quickly became serious. "Again, you understand what you are agreeing to, Chen. This is not a vacation or a simple cultural visit. You will be living as a full member of a Valkyrie family pod on their homeworld for 14 months, participating in their most intimate and vulnerable moments, including multiple cycle experiences." Jake nodded. "I understand and I know the risks, but I also know that humanity has always grown by taking chances on connection, by choosing to trust and be trusted, and after what HFY and I went through together, I believe this can work." The commander studied him for a long moment, then reached across the desk to shake his hand. "You are either very brave or very crazy, Chen. Maybe both. But regardless, you are making history, and I expect regular reports on how humanity can better prepare for deeper interspecies relationships over the next 3 weeks. The station became a whirlwind of preparation as Jake underwent intensive training in Valkyrie, language customs, and family structures, and he learned that Valkyrie pods operated on principles of collective decision-making and shared emotional responsibility, and that his role would be to contribute fully to pod life, not as a guest, but as a genuine member. Valkyrie crew members who had initially been distant now sought Jake out to share their own stories of pod life and cycles, and to test whether this human truly understood what he was volunteering for, and Jake answered their questions honestly, including his fears and uncertainties, and that honesty seemed to earn their respect more than false confidence would have. One afternoon, Thorin, the Valkyrie engineer, cornered Jake in the mess hall and sat down across from him with a serious expression. "You know that joining a family pod means you will experience things that most humans have never witnessed, like what Jake is." Thorin leaned forward, like seeing pod members at their most vulnerable during deep cycles, like participating in collective grief when a pod member dies, like being present for new bonds forming between pod members and for old bonds dissolving. "You will have nowhere to hide, Jake. Chen. No privacy, no emotional distance. You will be fully exposed, and so will they. Can you handle that?" Jake thought about the lockdown and the deepening and the intensity of sharing memories and emotions with Sphera without any barriers, and he nodded. "Yes, I can handle it, because I understand now that vulnerability is not weakness. It's the foundation of real connection." Thrawn sat back and his skin shifted to approving amber. "Then you may actually succeed, human. Most species cannot grasp this, but you seem to understand it in your bones." As the departure date approached, Jake spent more time with HFY learning about her specific family pod, which consisted of 7 members, ranging from her youngest sibling Kivara, who was only 8 cycle years old, to the matriarch Zelana, who had lived for 300 years and carried the pod's collective memory. "They sound amazing," Jake said as HFY showed him holographic images of her family swimming through underwater gardens and working together on scientific projects. They are wonderful, Shivera agreed, but they are also cautious about you. They have never met a human before, and they worry that you will not understand our ways or that you will judge us for our differences. You will need to be patient and prove yourself. Slowly, Jake smiled. I can do patient. I have been practicing with you for months, Noshvira. Laughed, and the sound was like water chimes, and she touched his hand briefly. I am grateful that you are willing to do this. Jake, my family needs to see that humans can be trusted, and you are the perfect ambassador because you do not just tolerate difference, you embrace it, though. The night before departure, the station held a ceremony that blended human and Velkari traditions with Commander Williams, giving a speech about the historic nature of the exchange, while Velkari crew members performed a bioluminescent display that filled the observation deck with shifting patterns of light that Jake now understood represented welcome and hope. Jake stood at the center of attention, feeling awkward and honored at the same time as crew members from both species approached to wish him well and to share their own hopes for what his success might mean for future cooperation. And Jake realized that he was not just representing himself anymore, but all of humanity, and that was both terrifying and motivating. After the ceremony, Jake returned to his quarters one last time to pack his few belongings, and he found himself sitting on the couch where he had spent so many evenings talking with Shvera, and where they had weathered the intensity of the lockdown together, and he felt a strange mix of nostalgia and anticipation. Found him there an hour later, and sat down next to him with her skin glowing soft amber. Nervous, she asked. Terrified, Jake admitted, but also excited. I keep thinking about how random this all was, that we got assigned as roommates, that the lockdown happened during your cycle, that all these coincidences led to this moment. Vera smiled. I do not think they were coincidences. I requested you specifically as a roommate after reviewing your file, your history of helping alien refugees. Your cultural sensitivity scores your record of staying calm in crisis situations. I believed you were someone who could understand my people. Jake turned to look at her. You planned this, not the cycle during lockdown. Shavira said quickly. That was genuinely accidental, but I chose you as a roommate because I wanted to test my theory that humans were capable of deeper connection than most species believed, and you proved me right in ways I could not have predicted. Jake shook his head, amazed. So this whole time I thought I was just being a good roommate, and instead I was participating in first contact on a whole new level. Shvera reached out and took his hand. You were being a good roommate, Jake. That is exactly what made the difference. Not because you were performing or trying to impress, but because genuine kindness and presence are part of who you are as a human, and that is what my people needed to see. Next morning, Jake and Shavira boarded a Velkari transport ship that would take them to the homeworld, and as the station grew smaller in the viewport, Jake felt the full weight of what he was leaving behind: his career on Earth, his family and friends, the comfortable, predictable life he had known, but he also felt the pull of something new and historic waiting ahead. The journey took 5 days, and Jake spent the time learning more Velkari language and practicing the complex gesture communications that pods used during cycle times when verbal language became difficult, and Shavira drilled him on family pod etiquette and protocol until Jake could recite proper greetings and responses in his sleep. On the final day of travel, they approached the Velkari homeworld, and Jake pressed his face to the viewport to see the beautiful blue-green planet covered. It's mostly an ocean with scattered island chains and underwater cities that glowed with bioluminescence. Even from orbit it is beautiful. Jake whispered, wait until you see it from below, Shavira said with pride in her voice. Wait until you swim through the kelp forests and see the light gardens and meet my family, who are waiting to welcome you with hope and caution in equal measure. The ship landed at a floating dock, and Jake followed Shavira down the ramp into warm, humid air that smelled like salt and growing things, and there waiting on the dock were 7 Velkari of different sizes and colors, all watching Jake with large, reflective eyes that held curiosity and wariness. Vera stepped forward and made formal introductions in Velkari, and Jake bowed respectfully and spoke the greeting phrase he had practiced. Family pod of Shvera, I come as friend and student hoping to learn your ways and earn your trust. I bring the goodwill of my species and the promise that I will honor your vulnerabilities as you honor mine. Youngest Kivara darted forward with the impulsiveness of youth encircled Jake, staring at him with open fascination. "You are very tall for someone without forearms," she announced, "and your skin does not glow at all. How do you show your feelings, Jake?" Smiled down at her. "We use facial expressions and voice tone and body language instead. Want me to show?" Yakivara nodded eagerly, and Jake demonstrated different human expressions. Happiness, sadness, surprise, and curiosity, while Kivara watched with delight and tried to imitate them with her own more alien features, and the tension on the dock eased slightly as the other pod members watched this exchange. The matriarch Zalana moved forward slowly with her ancient body glowing soft gold, and she studied Jake with eyes that had seen 3 centuries of Velkari history. "You have kind eyes, human." "Jake," she said in heavily accented English, "Shvera has told us much about you, about your response during her cycle, about your willingness to stay present through discomfort. These are rare qualities in any species." Jake met her gaze steadily. "I believe that real friendship, real alliance, requires showing up for each other, especially in difficult moments. I am here to prove that humans understand this not just in theory but in practice." As Lana reached out one hand and touched Jake's forehead in what Shavira had told him was the gesture of welcome to family then. "You are welcome in our pod, human Jake. We will teach you our ways, and you will teach us yours, and together we will discover if our species can truly become family across the stars." Other pod members came forward one by one to welcome Jake with the forehead touch, and Jake felt the weight of their hope, and their caution, and their willingness to take this chance on a human stranger, and he promised himself that he would not let them down, that he would honor their trust with everything he had. That evening, the pod gathered for a meal in their underwater home, which was built into a coral reef and lit with bioluminescent plants, and Jake sat among them feeling overwhelmed and out of place, but also strangely at home, as they asked him questions about Earth and human customs and shared stories about their own lives. Vera sat next to him, and at one point she leaned close and whispered, "You are doing well, Jake. They like you already." "I can see it in their color patterns," Jake whispered back. "I just hope I can live up to their expectations. You already are," Shavera said simply. "By being genuinely yourself, that is all they need to see as." The evening wore on, and the conversation flowed easily between species. Jake found himself looking around at the faces of his new family pod, at Kivara, who was falling asleep against her older sibling's shoulder, at Zalana, who was sharing ancient stories with gentle wisdom, at Shavira, who was glowing amber with contentment, and he realized that this was what he had been searching for without knowing it. A chance to build something real and lasting across the vast distances between species, a chance to prove that humanity is not just clever or adaptable, but genuinely capable of the deep bonds that made civilizations worth building, and a chance to discover what he himself was capable of when pushed beyond every comfort zone he had known outside the underwater windows. The Velkari sun set below the horizon, and the ocean came alive with bioluminescent life, creating a light show that rivaled anything Jake had seen in space, and he thought about how far he had come from that first awkward meeting with Shavera in their station apartment to this moment, sitting in an alien ocean, surrounded by beings who were learning to trust him and whom he was learning to trust. In return, the journey ahead would have challenges and misunderstandings and moments of doubt, but Jake felt ready for them because he finally understood what it meant to be human in a galaxy full of other thinking, feeling beings. It meant showing up fully, it meant staying present through discomfort, it meant offering vulnerability and accepting it in return. It meant building bridges instead of walls. And as the youngest pod member, Shavara asked Jake to tell them a human bedtime story, and as the family settled in to listen with glowing skin and curious eyes, Jake began to speak, and he knew that this was just the beginning of a story that would be told for generations, about the first human who joined a Velkari family pod and helped prove that connection across species was not just possible but beautiful and necessary, and worth every risk. The future stretched ahead full of unknowns, but Jake faced it with hope and determination, because he was no longer just Jake Chen, cultural liaison. He was Jake Chenpod, member ambassador, bridge builder, and living proof that humanity deserved its place among the stars, not because humans were the strongest or the smartest, but because when it mattered most, humans knew how to care and that made all the difference in the universe.